Hi. We continue today in 1 Samuel 9:1 to 10:16 on the B1 part of the chiasm that we've been following for the last few videos. As you can see on the right side of the screen in the yellow-orange section 10:2 to 13. We're not going to go through that entire section today, just the first part of it, because there's so much going on here. If you haven't been following with us in this section, you can see from the chiasm that we've been looking at the after the meeting with the girls who showed Saul and his servant boy where the town was, where they would meet the man of God, and they meet Samuel there at the gate of the city, as we see in the C1 part, and then he brings them up to the Bama, the high place, to have a meal with 30 of the local invited guests, which is clearly putting Saul above the others. And throughout this time, Saul has almost nothing to say other than when he first met Saul and Saul began to speak to him, and he asked the question, "Why do you speak to me this way?" And then he doesn't speak again the entire rest of the scene, including what we're going to see today, but Samuel does almost all the talking. And among the many themes we're looking at here is what is the relationship between Saul and Samuel as symbols of the various kinds of leadership that the authors here are grappling with in the face of threats like the Philistines on the outside and chaos and anarchy amongst the people on the inside. Because as we've been looking at, the end of Judges ends with there was no king and everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and yet we just saw a few verses ago that Yahweh says the point of having a king is both to save the people from the Philistines and to constrain the people's behavior. And we're going to see some other reasons given as we continue through 1 Samuel 8 to 12. But today we're going to focus simply on Samuel's speech. And to put it further in context, a couple of tools we've been looking at. So here is the sequence of encounters between Saul and Samuel, and we saw the first one was before the banquet in the same scene, and now we're looking at this one here from 9:26 to 10:9. And the end of what we look at today will point forward to the next one in chapter 13, when the question of the 7-day way to Gilgal takes place, and we'll see that one there. And then finally in 15 during Samuel's lifetime, and then in 28 after Samuel's lifetime, as we'll see. We've also been looking at these key words, and important for today is matz, to find. As you can see here, it's used several times in this immediate section, so that's what we're going to be looking at. Remember that Saul set out to find his father's donkeys, and that'll be mentioned here, but instead he's going to find a kingship or a rulership or messiahship or something, as we'll see. And one thing I want to do as we start here is I want you to hear what this might sound like to Saul, because as you see on the left side of the screen, the text is broken up by verses, and we tend to pause, of course, to give people we're talking to a chance to listen more clearly. But I want you to hear the torrent of words that pours out of Samuel's voice to Saul, who at this point has simply gotten up off the roof and come down at Samuel's command really, and this is what he hears. So let's listen to it this way so we can hear the whole torrent of words at once. "When you depart from me today, you will meet 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin at Zilzah. They will say to you, 'The donkeys that you went to seek are found, and now your father has stopped worrying about them and is worrying about you, saying, "What shall I do about my son?" Then you shall go on from there further and come to the oak of Tabor. 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there, one carrying 3 kids, another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a skin of wine. They will greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread, which you shall accept from them. After that you shall come to Gibeah Elohim, at the place where the Philistine garrison is. There, as you come to the town, you will meet a band of prophets coming down from the shrine with harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre, playing in front of them. They will be in a prophetic frenzy. Then the Spirit of Yahweh will possess you, and you will be in a prophetic frenzy along with them, and be turned into a different person. Now when these signs meet you, do whatever you see fit to do, for God is with you. And you shall go down to Gilgal ahead of me. Then I will come down to you to present burnt offerings and offer sacrifices of well-being. 7 days you shall wait until I come to you and show you what you shall do." Phew! Got all that, Saul? Got all that, readers? An enormous amount of data, and as we'll see, most of it is never expressed again in the text and seems utterly irrelevant to any purpose that the authors might have other than to showing Samuel exerting this prophetic authority over Saul through his clairvoyant ability to predict what will happen. Except we're not going to see most of these things happen other than in a simple narrative summary. All these signs took place in one day. So whatever reason the writers think for having Samuel lay it out in detail and skipping right over it, right up until he meets the band of prophets, is something for us to grapple with. Why do we need to know about these places like Zilzah, which is otherwise completely unknown. In fact, it's unclear what the word even means in Hebrew. That they come to the oak of Tabor. There's a mount of Tabor, but what's an oak of Tabor? And it's presented, as we'll see, as a specific tree, the oak of Tabor, like Saul should know what that tree is. And then going up to Bethel, and the specification of the carrying 3 kids, which has nothing to do with anything, and why would they only give him 2 loaves out of 3 of the bread, and what's the point of that? And then they come to Gibeah Elohim, which presumably is the same as Saul's hometown Gibeah, and that's where he'll see the band of prophets, right outside of town. But we'll also see that a Philistine garrison is there. In Gibeah? There's specifically one in Gibeah. That's news to us, and we don't hear about it anywhere else. And then finally, for this point, at the very end, as you can see, now when these signs meet you. So that's referring to what's above. And then what follows, you shall go down to Gilgal, is something completely separate. And as we'll see, although Samuel says 7 days you shall wait, it's not clear 7 days starting when. Because when we get to chapter 13, we'll see plainly much time has intervened between the fulfillment of these signs, as the text says, that same day, and what happens when Saul gets to Gilgal and finally meets Samuel there. So a lot of strange mystery going on here, but plainly an expression of Samuel's ability to predict the future in astounding detail. But it leaves Saul with almost nothing to do except be an automaton and follow through on this until the end of Samuel's speech, which says, then do whatever you want to do. And we'll look more closely at that in a minute. So that's the framework of what we're looking at here. So as we start to look at this, although I noted that Zilzal is an unknown place, Rachel's tomb is not an unknown place. So let's look at the beginning of this and then look at a couple of images to set us in the situation then and now. When you depart from me today, you will meet 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin. So we look at the map here and we realize that one of the issues in this section is the contrast between the territory of Benjamin, and we'll see that the word literally means boundary of Benjamin, and the later Judah, from the perspective of the Deuteronomistic historians who are composing or editing the final product here of this entire history from Deuteronomy through 2 Kings, from a very Jerusalem-centered perspective. One of their key views is that no worship of Yahweh can properly take place except in the Jerusalem temple, and that the proper home of God's people is in Judah. And some of that carries out into the, quote, reform of Josiah in the late 7th century before the Babylonian exile. So there's certainly a Benjamin versus Judah element of this, and Saul clearly represents the Benjamin side, and David will represent the Judah side. So we don't know what Zelzah is, but we do know Rachel's tomb, and we know it from a couple of angles. So it's references back to Genesis 35:19, and let's go back there for 1 second, because we can see here Rachel died. She was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem, which is to say down here. And what she dies doing is giving birth to Benjamin. Specifically the birth of Benjamin. So that's what's being referenced back here. Rachel's tomb is a reference back to the death of Benjamin. But if we were to look at this, first we can look at it here on Google Maps, and you can see Rachel's tomb marked there between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And one of the issues is, is this part of the Judah territory or part of the Benjamin territory? Where it's located there to Bethlehem is plainly part of the Judah territory, because from Jerusalem south is plainly Judah. Benjamin is north of that. As you can, although the map we showed here does not show the boundaries. Benjamin is this territory up here, and Gibeah is in Benjamin. So this is Benjamin here, and according to Google Maps, and the message that it was on the way to Bethlehem that Rachel died puts it here. But when we zoom in on this map, we see some interesting things. Before we do that, let's look at some traditional imagery of Rachel's tomb. So here's a romanticized photograph from the 1950s, clearly before the more recent wars between both Israel and its neighbors and its interior wars with the Palestinians on the land, showing this building obviously built there at a place that is certainly arbitrary because there's no specific way we know, and there's certainly no body there. Then here's a painting of it that shows this nice romanticized form. And if you look on Jewish websites, you see that Rachel's tomb is described as the 3rd holiest site to Jews, behind the Temple Mount and the Wailing Wall, the remaining wall of the temple. How people make a top 10 hits of holy sites and weigh those, I don't know, but it's certainly considered a holy site. And when you try to look at it, you see this. This image from Google Maps is from the Palestinian side here in Bethlehem, where you can't get there because of this wall. And when you zoom in on the wall, you can see this sort of ironic note there about being prepared to be treated with rubber bullets. And when you also look closer, you can see prisoner poetry and various things. But when you look on the other side of the wall, you can see tourists there. And in fact, strangely, there's a Banksy walled-off hotel there. So the artist Banksy has chosen to have a tourist lodging in a hotel on the Israeli side of the wall that keeps Rachel's tomb entombed itself behind this wall. So caught up in today's politics just as much as in ancient politics about who can claim access to Rachel's tomb. Sad but true as we explore the ongoing struggles over this territory. So returning to our text for now, Saul is told he'll meet two men by Rachel's tomb, and of course this presumes he knows where Rachel's tomb is. It's only mentioned here. The other references you see in my note in the lower left are to Rachel and descendants of Rachel, but this in Genesis 35 are the only mentions of her tomb. So the boundary of Benjamin, as I noted earlier here, gavul here meaning boundary, and you see a number of times that word is used. So recognizing this is the boundary between Benjamin and Judah, at least it's claimed to be in the boundary of Benjamin by this text. And the people you meet there, these two men will say to you, the donkeys that you went to seek are found, and now your father has stopped worrying about them and is worrying about you, saying, what shall I do about my son? So a couple of things there. We've seen that phrase out of several people's mouths, and as Barbara Green noted early on as we first saw it, it's out of everybody's mouth except Kish, who's the one supposedly saying it. But here in this case, these two men by Rachel's tomb know what's going on with Kish and are apparently expecting Saul to be there to make this statement. So, and how Samuel knows that isn't to be said. But that's the first sign. Then the second sign, you go on from there to the Oak of Tabor, and three men of God at Bethel will meet you carrying the kids and the loaves of bread, and they will greet you and give you 2 loaves. And this brings us back to a point made by Jacobs that I want to bring up here. He says this as a progression, and this is from a footnote from the article that I referred to a couple of videos ago. He says, in the first sign, Saul is completely passive. That is, he just sees the men by Rachel's tomb. In the second sign, he's more active. That is, supposed to take the 2 loaves of bread. And the third, he is an active participant, which, as we see, is when he joins the prophets in their frenzy. So it's certainly suggesting a progression of engagement by Saul, except that's not what's narrated. So as we continue on to the Oak of Tabor, 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there. And let's look at this map just so we can get some relative idea. So if we assume this is starting from Ramah, which is Samuel's city, although I made a point in previous videos saying it's not named, and so it's simply referred to over and over again as the city, so there's certainly a point to that. But if we want to assume that it's Ramah, just for some point of reference, we have no idea where Zilzal is, but if it's in any traditional place on the territory of edge of Benjamin's territory, it would be somewhere down here. Then where the Oak of Tabor, we have no idea, but Bethel is up here, and Bethel has been a traditional boundary between the 2 kingdoms, between Israel in the north and Judah in the south, and is an important point in the struggle in Josiah's reform. I've mentioned that before, and it also echoes Jacob expressing after his Jacob's latter experience, God is in this place, I didn't know it, and he called the place Bethel, meaning house of El, or house of God. So we see those references, pro and con, of Bethel associated with Jacob and associated with Josiah. Notice it says you're going up to meet God, which is the Elohim at Bethel, not Yahweh, which makes sense out of that. And so you're going up to Bethel here to meet the people with the bread and the goats and the skin of wine. And I'll note here a little thing in the wordplay here. The word for skin, Neville, is identical to the word for harp in verse 5. One would never get that in English. It's also very close to the Hebrew Nabal, which means fool, as we'll see the name of the character in 1 Samuel 25, as well as the characteristic of being foolish. So a word with a lot of valence there that can be played out in a number of ways. So another carrying a skin of wine, and they will greet you. Literally, they will ask about your welfare, your peace, ask about your shalom. And so in the asking, Vasha'ula, sorry, the other way around, Vasha'alu, is a wordplay. They will Saul you about your welfare and give you 2 loaves of bread. And then back to the hometown of Gibeah. So down from Bethel to the hometown of Gibeah, where we hear a Philistine garrison is. And as Sumora notes, that the plural construct here in Netzivi suggests a composite structure, not just a building or just the troops, but like a fort or some kind of place where the Philistines are spending some time there. Not just in tents for the moment, but spending some time camped for waiting for battle. Right there occupying Gibeah. Notice it doesn't say outside of town, but right there. And there, as you come to the town, you will meet a band of prophets. Hevel here, the word for band, only here in verse 10, and referring to the same situation. But a group of prophets. We otherwise don't know that much about bands of prophets, although we certainly see Elijah and Elisha as a sense of prophets out there apart from the royal prophets that we will see. We've already seen like Samuel, and of course like Nathan for David in the second book of Samuel. So this group of free-floating prophets here with 4 instruments, with harp, as I already noted, the same as Neville, with tambourine or toph, which will also greet David, as we'll see later, with flute, a halil, only one other time, and there it'll celebrate Solomon, and lyre, which of course David will play to soothe Saul later. So playing in front of them, literally playing in their faces, and they will be in a prophetic frenzy. And I don't like the word frenzy here because it suggests they've lost their mind in some way. The hitpatel stem of the verb neb, which is the same as the noun nabi, meaning a prophet, simply means to be in a prophetic state. And although scholars often commented on that as involving dancing, and the suggestion is made here, of course, with all the instruments there, they'd be dancing around. Perhaps much like the dervish tradition and the Islamic tradition, of that kind of prophetic activity, where one is simply in the spirit by losing one's inhibitions and letting the music take them, as opposed to what Samuel's doing, which is speaking truths to people, or what other prophets do of challenging those in power to return to the covenant. So this meaning of prophetic is to be in an ecstatic state of being possessed by God. One might call it a mystical state, other than the fact that it's not just a quiet state of silence and solitude, but an active, engaged one here with the body and with the music. And so then, when that happens, Samuel tells Saul, the Spirit of Yahweh will possess you. And let's look at that closely here. This is the first time since Samson, and it's plainly something that activates Judges in the book of Judges. There's no sense in what we've seen in the last few chapters that the person made king would be possessed by the Spirit of Yahweh. Certainly Deuteronomy 17:14-20, which I'm taking as a later message, not written yet at this time, but certainly that controls a larger picture of the Deuteronomistic history, suggests that the person is listening to Yahweh, but the sense of being taken in here, or possessed or rushed upon here, in that sense of being taken over by that Spirit, is not something that's associated with kings. It's something associated with the judges. So again, the strange liminal ambiguity of exactly what Saul will become. Because so far he's been anointed a Nagid, not a king, a generic sort of ruler, but he's right now being told by Samuel what will happen, not leaving him much power at all to decide for himself. And maybe that's because he's his old self, and now he'll be turned into a different person. Literally, the verb fed from the nifal means to turn oneself, like to turn oneself around. As we see from my note down here from Polson, what Samuel had failed to do then, to point out to Saul the harm of both, that the Spirit of God that causes the king to prophesy is invariably evil, and the king upon whom it rushes does not have God with him, whatever Samuel asserts. Which is to say, the Spirit of God is not something associated with kingship. The Spirit of God is associated with functions and people outside of kingship. Prophets like Elijah and Elisha and judges, as we've seen. So it's going to be a very ambiguous thing to suggest that a king is filled with the Holy Spirit or with God's Spirit, and yet that's not what it said here. The question will be, is Saul among the prophets? But we'll get there in a minute. So when these signs meet you, and note that phrasing which matches the Hebrew, the signs will meet you. You won't meet the signs. It says that the signs will come to you, like everything has been coming to Saul so far. The servant boy was with him, and the girls came to him, and they led him to Samuel, and everything has just been happening to him once he started off on this pursuit of the donkeys, which he wouldn't have even continued if it wasn't for the servant boy. He was ready to go home the first day. And so these things are happening to Saul, and we've not heard a word heard about Saul, whether he likes it or doesn't like it, whether he has any ambitions for power or not. He's just walking around, and all these things are happening, and now he's subject to Samuel's long speech. But when Samuel finishes here, when he says, when these signs meet you, do whatever you see fit to do, or literally from the Hebrew, do what your hand finds. And that's the final finding here. So what your hand finds. As Samora notes here, what is emphasized here by the use of hand is not so much Saul's impulse as his ability. For God is with you. And strangely, the with you is a feminine pronoun here, which I'm not sure what to make of that. But here it's again, Elohim is with you, not Yahweh, which is strange because it says the Spirit of Yahweh will possess you, but Elohim will be with you. Whether we take that as different sources or take it as these are simply interchangeable ways to refer to the God of the Israelites, and certainly the God of Samuel isn't clear, and I'm not sure is answerable. And I'll come down one little bit more, even though we're not going to look at this in detail, because I want to finish this section and point toward what's coming. So what we saw so far, the signs, and what we see in verse 8 is sort of an afterword here, epilogue, because as we're told here, the signs will meet you, and then we hear from the narrator in verse 9, all these signs were fulfilled that day, despite the fact that these are distances to go around to all these different places, as if Samuel did all that in one day. But I want to draw attention to what is in between the fact that the signs will meet you and the signs will be fulfilled, and that's this in verse 8. And she'll go down to Gilgal, which is way over here, ahead of me, and then I will come down to you to present burnt offerings and offer sacrifices of well-being. In other words, Samuel once again played the priestly role. And then he says, 7 days you shall wait until I come to you and show you what you shall do. So 2 things there to finish our session for today. 7 days starting when? If all these signs are fulfilled on this same day that they're getting up after the banquet in verse 9, and Samuel won't meet Saul in Gilgal till chapter 13. A lot is happening in chapters 11 and 12, and certainly that's not all happening in one day. So there's the one day the signs happen, this indeterminate amount of time in between in which there's a battle and more, and then the 7-day counter seems to start, and Samuel, as we'll see, will be late and will mark the end of Saul over that. But is this the word of Yahweh or the word of Elohim to Saul, or is this simply the word of Samuel, who is still piqued that he's being replaced by Saul as the person to intervene between Yahweh and the people? It's not clear at all how much we're hearing is from Samuel, how much it's from Yahweh, how much it's from the pro-David perspective of the authors, how much it's from the pro-Saul perspective of the authors, or how much it's from an editor that put it all together at some later time. But when it's over, Saul will be filled with the Spirit of Yahweh and be among the prophets, and that's where we'll take it up next time. See you then. Bye-bye.